Tonight, we return to the ruins of the day the jungle took the empire. Moonlight drapes the stones in silver and the air is heavy with the perfume of damp earth. Crickets sing their restless hymn while the wind carries a low murmur, as though the jungle itself is whispering. The once great avenues of Angkor lie in shadow, their carved guardians watching in eternal stillness. Roots as thick as serpents coil around towers, pressing against the patient stone, waiting for the moment when it will give way. A stillness clings to the air, yet beneath it hums an ancient tension, a silent struggle between what was built by mortal hands and what was born of the earth. Once, these towers reached toward the heavens, mirrors to the peaks of Mount Meru, the sacred home of the gods. Now they seem to bow, their crowns choked by moss and vine. In the distance, the silhouette of Angkor Wat rises like a dream fading at dawn. No human footsteps echo here now, only the rustle of leaves, the drip of hidden water, and the distant haunting cry of a bird unseen. Let the dust settle, the echoes rise, and the forgotten thrones speak once more. The city had not always been a kingdom of silence. Centuries ago, when the Khmer Empire was at its height, Angkor was the largest metropolis on earth, home to hundreds of thousands. Its temples shone with gilded spires, its canals glittered under the tropical sun. Stone bridges, lined with rows of divine and demonic figures, spanned wide moats where the water shimmered like polished bronze. Traders came from across seas and forests, carrying spices, silk, and secrets. The jungle then was not an enemy. It was a boundary, a green ocean that framed the empire's power. But power is fragile, even when carved in stone. In whispered tales, the elders speak of the jungle as a living spirit, patient and watchful, waiting for the moment when human hands grew careless, when the prayers to the gods grew faint. Some say the forest had always wanted its land back, and that one day it would rise like a tide, swallowing roads, homes, and temples alike. In truth, the story of Angkor's fall is woven from both fact and myth. Historians tell of shifting monsoons, the slow decay of the water system, the hunger of neighboring powers. Yet, the old stories linger, of Naga serpents offended, of gods turning their faces away, of an ancient curse whispered into the roots of the banyan trees. Whatever the cause, one thing is certain. On the day the jungle took the empire, the city did not fall in an instant. It was a long surrender, a slow drowning in green. The moon passes behind a cloud, and the ruins dissolve into darkness. Somewhere deep in the trees, a branch cracks, not from wind, but from something moving, unseen. The air thickens, and the scent of rain rises, even though the sky is still. The jungle breathes, and the stones seem to listen. Here begins the tale, not of a single day, but of the many days and years that became the day. The moment when power slipped from human grasp and was taken by the ancient, untamed heart of the land. At first light, the city reveals itself the way a lake reveals sky, by reflecting what it loves. Towers rise from the plain like 100 stone flames, and from each flame 1,000 carvings watch the world awaken. He walks the royal road that stitches east to west and sees how line and measure tame a wilderness. Causeways straighten across moats, Naga balustrades coil into balletic curves, gates align with horizons as if the earth itself were drafted with a ruler of light. The city breathes in squares and circles, a geometry of faith. He passes under a gate crowned with faces, serene and omniscient. 4 directions, 4 gazes, 1 smile that never blinks. Beneath them, soldiers once paced in bronze light, elephants nodded in patient rhythm, and officials bore palm leaf records of rice and tribute. The streets bustle again in memory. Vendors with baskets of sugar palm, water bearers moving in a shimmer of heat, monks in saffron slipping like brief flames through a forest of shade. The great reservoirs, barrays, lie to the sides like inland seas. He can almost hear oars knocking wooden boats, the slap of water along ribs, children laughing on the steps. Here, a historical truth anchors the dream. Angkor Wat rises in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II, a temple mountain to Vishnu, its galleries unspooling bas-reliefs of armies, heavens, and hells. Its central quincunx of towers imitates Mount Meru and its cosmic peaks. The stones are set with fitted precision, their weight rendered weightless by balanced voids, courtyards, windows, corridors, the measured breath of sanctity. He moves through one gallery where the churning of the ocean of milk stretches in low relief. Devas and asuras pull the serpent in opposite directions, and the world emerges from their struggle. It is a carved thesis. Creation comes from tension, order from contest. Across the plain, the hydraulic city glitters. Canals lace outward, guiding monsoon excess into calm geometry. Spillways, embankments, sluices. The words are modern, the intelligence ancient. He recalls the surveyor's revelations, how centuries later, light from the sky, LIDAR, peels away the canopy and finds another city beneath the city. Blocks, neighborhoods, industrial zones of kilns and ponds, an urban sprawl invisible from the ground. What seemed a temple forest is, in truth, a metropolis intricately planned. The empire engineers harvest rain as if it were a crop. The myth breathes beside the fact. Elders tell that Angkor is built at the command of Indra, who sends celestial architects to raise a palace worthy of gods. Some whisper of a serpent princess, a Naga who marries a human prince and drinks the floodwaters so the land can be lived upon. Her spiral blood becomes the city's canals, her scales the glinting ponds. Others insist the towers were lowered from the heavens at night, each stone humming with the syllable Om as it settled into place. In those legends, men are stewards, not makers. They polish what divinity has laid upon the earth. He steps onto a causeway, flanked by lions whose stone hides ripple with muscles fixed forever in readiness. The moat reflects a broken sky. In the distance, temple gopuras open like mouths, devouring and releasing pilgrims in the same breath. He follows the scent of oil and incense toward a sanctum where apsaras dance along the walls, not as frozen decorations, but in flight. Even unmoving, they suggest movement. Even silent, they suggest song. Their fingers compose mudras that unspool meaning. Abundance, protection, welcome. The empire's grammar is gesture. Labor hums behind the quiet. Scribes track rice from paddy to granary, levees funnel water to terraced fields. The calendar knots the year around the monsoon. The city's pulse belongs to wet and dry, to sowing and cutting, to the predictable unpredictability of rain. Oxen drag plows in mirrored paddies. Women plant with a rhythm learned from mothers in moonrise. Granaries lift on stilts against damp and rat. In the distance, bronze drums keep time like distant thunder, and festivals tie joy to the hinge of seasons. He tastes palm sugar on his tongue, hears the rasp of saws shaping laterite, the ring of chisels on sandstone, 1,000 trades braided into cityhood. Here, another historical fact steadies the vision. The barrays span kilometers, the West Barray alone stretching roughly 8 by 2 kilometers, capable of holding millions of cubic meters of water. Whether ritual lake or utilitarian reservoir, it proves one truth: this city is a conversation with the sky. He thinks of the steppers who descended to stone landings to draw water, of fishermen skimming dusk with nets like handwriting, of priests who mirrored the heavens on the ground, constellations mapped to pylons, seasons to gates. The fringe belief persists that every tower is a star-given bone. Some claim Angkor Wat aligns not only with solstices, but with a secret zodiac of gods whom only royal astronomers dare name aloud. Night after night, a circle of white-robed watchers supposedly reads the sky from the topmost terraces, altering the fates of wars and harvests with prayers threaded to stellar paths. In such stories, astronomy and enchantment are the same discipline spoken in different registers, and yet mystery gnaws softly at the edges of certainty. Scholars debate whether the West Barray irrigates fields extensively, or mainly symbolizes the cosmic ocean. Inscriptions tell much, but not all. The exact administrative web that bound so many people into mutual purpose flickers like torchlight in a windy corridor. Even the orientation of Angkor Wat, westward, unusual among temples, continues to invite questions. Is it for Vishnu's sunset realm, for royal funerary rites, for a poet's private idea? He lingers on that strangeness, how a temple to life also frames death, how a city to permanence also calendars decay. He moves into Angkor Thom, the great city, where the Bayon rises at the empire's heart, a hive of towers each wearing a face. Smiles multiply into the dozens, then into the hundreds, until the world seems ballroomed in benevolent surveillance. Some faces tilt toward jungle, others toward streets where marketplaces once bloomed with lacquerware and stitched cotton, iron tools and salt fish, beads of glass and stories of far coasts. Here, royal roads weld the cardinal points. Here, processions stamp patterns into dust. Here, the Devaraja, God-King, incarnates sovereignty upon a ritual mountain of stone. At the Terrace of the Elephants, reliefs parade royal hunts and triumphal entries. He sees tusked silhouettes and parasols, jasmine flung upon the air, dancers whose wrists describe circles of rain. The empire displays itself to itself, and in reflection, becomes more itself. Not display for vanity, but for cohesion. In seeing the king hunt, the people see a figure who tames the wild, as their canals tame the flood. In seeing the gods carved, they see the promise that order can be contoured into permanence. He pauses at a pond where lotus leaves take the light like coins. A dragonfly skates a signature across the surface. The city's genius lies not merely in stone, but in choreography. Water to rice, rice to tax, tax to labor, labor to monument, monument to meaning. He senses how precariously all this depends on equilibrium. Seasons within expectation, rival kings held at bay, faith welded to throne. The jungle at the edge feels friendly now, a green wall that keeps storms and enemies outside the city's pulse. But walls invite tests. He listens, smiths tapping hilts into hilts, the chant of sutras at dawn, the grunt and sigh of oxen straining with cart, all the sounds of an empire secure in its story, not immune to trouble, but rehearsed in triumph. The jungle mutters like a neighbor beyond the fence. The people smile toward it when taking shade, fear it when night rises from its roots. One more myth threads through the day. It is said that Apsaras descend to bless new kings on nights when moonlight turns the moat to mercury. If the king keeps his vow, the city prospers. If he falters, the dancers withdraw and the jungle begins to lean closer. The boundary between blessing and abandonment is as thin as a silk scarf in wind. Whether true or not, the story keeps monarchs sleepless and priests meticulous. Stories are also infrastructure. By noon, heat sits on the stones like a god that refuses petition. He stands in the shadow of a tower and watches swifts thread through gaps like thrown needles. In every direction, the city declares itself the equal of nature by imitating nature's laws, pattern, balance, flow. Towers imitate mountains, moats imitate seas, causeways imitate rays of light, and courtyards imitate the breathing chambers of a living beast. It is audacity made beautiful. He closes his eyes and sees the city as one body. Head crowned by Angkor Wat, heart beating in Bayonne, lungs turning in berets and forests, gut content with rice. For now, the pulse is strong. For now, the 1,000 towers keep the horizon pinned in place. But the horizon is a promise, not a guarantee, and promises like stones can crack. In the age of the God Kings, the empire stands not only on stone and water, but on the conviction that its rulers are more than mortal. Here, the Devaraja, the God King, is the pivot on which the heavens turn. He does not merely reign, he incarnates. Crowned beneath the glare of a tropical sun, he is Vishnu walking the earth, Shiva's will made flesh, a living axis between realms. The people see in his profile the outline of eternity. In his breath, they hear the wind of cosmic order. He steps through the hall of audience, where once courtiers knelt in long rows like ripples before a rock. The floor, worn smooth by decades of obeisance, still holds the scent of sandalwood and lacquer. Columns rise like bundled spears, painted once in vermilion and gold, their capitals flowering into lotus blooms. From the high dais, the king looked down upon ambassadors bearing tribute from Champa, Ayutthaya, even distant China. Their gifts, bolts of silk, jars of scented oil, elephants caparisoned in silver bells, were not mere offerings, but acknowledgments that here stood a sovereign whose throne rested on both the earth and the sky. The historical truth threads through the myth. Jayavarman II, in the 9th century, proclaims himself Devaraja through a sacred ritual atop Phnom Kulen. A linga, the emblem of Shiva, becomes the physical vessel of his divine essence. From that moment, kingship in Angkor is bound to the gods by right as much as by blood. The royal line inherits not only power, but sanctity, and each successor becomes the keeper of the cosmic balance. This belief secures loyalty, for to betray the king is to fracture the universe's spine. And yet, a whisper persists. The belief that this bond is not permanent. The Naga princess who once married a human king and granted her blessing to his descendants will renew her favor only if each ruler comes to her in a dream before his coronation. Fail to do so, the old women murmur, and her coils will loosen from the city, letting the floodwaters return and the jungle creep in. Whether dream or omen, each new monarch approaches the night before his ascension with fasting, prayer, and the dread of silence. The court itself is a theater of calculated divinity. Dancers, their limbs painted with gold dust, perform Apsara ballets whose steps are older than the city. Each gesture carries a line of scripture. Each turn of the wrist unfolds a cosmic story. Priests burn resins whose smoke winds like spirits toward the roof beams. Musicians beat rhythms on bronze gongs, the pulses synchronized to the measured walk of the king. When he moves through the palace, parasols tilt to follow him like sunflowers chasing the sun. Even the air seems to hush until he is past. But power, this absolute, breeds shadows as well as light. Ministers with ambitions coil close to the throne, smiling as they plant seeds of doubt in the royal ear. Generals measure their loyalty against the weight of their armies. Distant provinces watch the capital's grandeur with pride but also with envy, wondering why their own tribute never seems to return as favor. In the carved corridors, whispers travel faster than the sandalwood smoke. There is a mystery historians still debate: the sudden shifts in temple dedication from Shiva to Vishnu, or vice versa, under different kings. Were these purely theological choices, or signs of deeper political rifts within the elite? Some inscriptions praise a king for restoring the true order. Others quietly omit the names of previous rulers, as if erasing a chapter. The stones hold both memory and amnesia, depending on who commands the chisel. The god-king's life is a cycle of ritual. At dawn, he appears before the east-facing shrine, saluting the sun's rebirth. At midday, he presides over councils where the empire's veins, its roads, canals, and garrisons, are mapped in words. At dusk, he offers flowers and rice at the shrine of the guardian spirits, ensuring their continued vigilance against misfortune. On festival days, he mounts an elephant draped in crimson and gold, processing through the city's avenues while petals rain from balconies and children run barefoot to touch the beast's flanks for luck. One fringe belief claims that within the palace lies a chamber no map records, a sanctum where the king communes with the gods directly. Its door is said to open only during eclipses, when the boundary between mortal and divine thins. Those who have seen it describe walls lined with mirrors of polished bronze, a ceiling painted with the constellations, and a single flame burning in a crystal lamp that never exhausts its oil. Scholars dismiss this as courtly invention, yet even they admit the palace still hides rooms no one has fully explored. Beyond the palace walls, the people live in the long shadow of the Devaraja. Farmers offer the first sheaf of their harvest at roadside shrines to bless the king's health. Merchants hang small brass bells outside their stalls, each chime a prayer for the monarch's favor. When the rains fail or enemies raid the border, eyes turn not to the generals or engineers, but to the god-king, whose bond with the divine must keep the empire whole. But the jungle, patient and impartial, cares little for titles. From the high terraces, one can see the green wall beyond the fields, a restless tide of leaves and vine. For now, it holds its distance, cowed by the reach of human order. Still, in the deep hours before dawn, some palace guards claim they hear the sound of branches shifting like footsteps, of roots groping through soil toward stone. The king sleeps in chambers perfumed with champa blossoms, his head resting beneath a canopy embroidered with scenes of the heavens. He dreams of gods and ancestors, of battles won and cities built. And somewhere in those dreams, perhaps, the Naga princess waits, silent, unreadable. deciding whether to keep her promise for another reign. In the morning, the bells of the palace will ring again, the city will stir, and the God-King will step into the day as though eternity still bends to his will. But eternity, like the jungle, has its own designs. Dawn hush settles like a thin veil, and the first thing he hears is breath, not human, not animal alone, but the long tidal exhale of the forest. It moves through Angkor's edges with a patient authority, a sound like cloth drawn over stone, like a river taught to walk on leaves. The jungle is not a wall so much as a pulse. It swells and ebbs with seasons, presses close, withdraws an inch, then two, then returns with vines as arguments and roots as verdicts. Where torchlight once mapped the night, figs now string lanterns of green. Where the city's sentries once traded passwords at the gates, cicadas trade electric hymns that rattle the ribs. He stands at a threshold where causeway meets undergrowth. The old stones hold heat from yesterday, but the leaf shadow keeps it gentle, a memory rather than a command. Ants ferry the morning across rough surfaces. A gecko flits with the arrogance of a prince who knows the crown has changed heads. The moat mirrors treetops instead of banners, and a banyan's roots hang like monastic robes from a high ledge, descending, testing, finding purchase in a seam carved for a god's ankle. The jungle is courteous to stone at first, asking permission in strands. Later, it forgets to ask. A historical fact lingers in the air like a sobered drumbeat. Each year, the Tonle Sap breathes with the monsoon, swelling several times in area as the Mekong reverse flows and floods the lake, then shrinking when the river drops, a natural bellows that fattens fish and feeds the plains. Angkor's life is tuned to this breathing. Canals poised to borrow and return, berets built to buffer too much, too little. When the breath is regular, the empire sounds like music. When it stutters, even the best-built instruments go slightly out of tune. He can feel that truth in the silence between birdsong, an offbeat gap that asks a question no king can answer with decree alone. On mornings like this, the forest feels almost liturgical. Sun falls through layers of leaves as through stained glass, the colors not bright but deep, tinctures of green with a trick of gold. A strangler fig, youthful and sincere, winds itself around an older trunk like a vow that will become a verdict. Silk cotton trees launch buttress roots like sails, catching the momentum of centuries. Lianas loop from canopy to canopy, telephone wires for creatures that have no letters to send and yet communicate everything: hunger, direction, warning, joy. Far above, gibbons write cursive arcs in the air. In the understory, mushrooms lift white ears to listen to decay. A fringe belief lives among villagers who come to cut resin from dipterocarp trees or gather rattan at dusk. The forest is governed by Neek Ta, guardian spirits who accept offerings and enforce taboos. They say certain groves belong to certain spirits, and that to enter them without song is to enter a palace without bowing. Some elders keep a piece of ironwood wrapped in cloth at their altar, a shard of the jungle's will, fed with rice and smoke. Others teach that if you whisper your true name to the wrong root, the forest will keep it, and you will wander in circles until a monk calls you back with a bell. Belief like this doesn't map aqueducts or levy taxes. It maps caution, and in mapping caution, it draws an invisible moat around green power. He notices how the city's maintenance once held the line with quiet heroism. Weeders who knew which shoots to spare, which to sever. Ditch clearers who kept silt obedient. Carpenters who repaired roofs before rot became biography. When labor thins, when war pulls hands to the border, when drought pulls backs to distant wells, when politics pulls minds into suspicion, maintenance blinks. In that blink, a seed sprouting in a cornice becomes a sapling in a parapet becomes a promise becomes a pry bar. The jungle does not conquer with armies, but with patience. Mystery has a habit of hiding in this patience. Scholars sift pollen from ancient sediments and argue in long, courteous papers about the sequence of change. Did deforestation upstream send torrents of silt down into canals, choking the city's veins? Did over-engineering make the waterworks rigid when flexibility was needed? Or did shifts in monsoon patterns, drought strung like beads across decades, invite the forest to retake abandoned fields first, walls second, sanctuaries last? The order of these events matters to science, he knows, but to the jungle, sequence is a necklace it can rethread. In any case, the conclusion is the same. A door left ajar will one day become a ruin without doors. He moves along a laterite wall where lichens have drawn a continent of slow continents, an atlas made by hunger. Here, a carving of an apsara wears a shawl of fern. There a guardian lion grows a mane of moss. The transformation is not desecration, only replacement. One beauty laid over another like script written over an older manuscript. He wonders if the sculptors knew the second authors would come, if they cut the lines slightly deeper for the sake of legibility under future leaves. Even the air is an argument for returning. Moisture collects in unseen ministries, handing out decrees to termites, to rot, to the subtle acids of leaf litter. Vines find mortar more palatable than bark. They drink the same rain that once fed the moat. A fallen branch lies across a threshold like a reminder that etiquette changes. Lizards court on lintels. A civet leaves messages in musk where incense once wrote petitions to gods. The jungle does not desecrate, it reassigns. A hunter's tale floats toward him from a village on the forest's hem. The man swears he saw a troop of langurs sitting like novice monks along the terrace, solemn as carved monks watching the sun arrive. When he approached, they did not flee. They looked past him, toward the towers, and chattered in a register he had never heard. He believes they were conversing with the house spirits of the temple, reminding them that attendance is now the business of wings and paws. He left an offering of fruit and backed away, not out of fear but in acknowledgement that the throne room keeps its throne, even if a new court has assembled. History places its careful finger on the map again. The sandstones of Angkor came largely from Phnom Kulen, quarried and floated along channels, lifted into narratives by hands counted in thousands. That mountain supplied the city's voice. Now the forest composes in the same language with different grammar. Stones once aligned by right drift by root's agenda. An arch yields one season, holds another, yields again, like a man nodding to a song he swears he does not know yet somehow remembers. He pauses beside a pool where frogs practice percussion against a still surface. Dragonflies stitch light into the day. It occurs to him that the jungle is not merely taking, it is also keeping shade where sun would split stone, keeping moisture where desiccation would powder inscriptions to dust, keeping the city from becoming a desert of crumbs. The forest's custody is not kind, but it is real. Without it, perhaps nothing would remain. With it, everything remains altered, inhabited by alien breath, and therefore alive. He thinks of a debate murmured among guides and monks, not in journals but in courtyards. Was the forest once further away, the city holding a wider moat of field between itself and green? Or did groves always thread close, allowed by kings who understood that a temple without trees is a mouth without a voice? The old men disagree with a friendship that predates their disagreement. Their stories settle like dust on leaves, unprovable and indispensable. A breeze rises. Somewhere a colony of bees turns its collective head toward flowers only they notice. The sound they make is the sound the berets must have made when full and content. A tonal hum, a promise. He steps back from the threshold and sees it. How the jungle, at this hour, looks like an empire conducting a careful siege, ladders built of vines, sappers made of water, banners sewn from canopy, all patience and certainty. There is no trumpet, no herald. The campaign proceeds by inches that accumulate into centuries. Night will come again, and with it, the chorus that convinced kings they were safe, and later convinced them they were not. For now, the day is a green bowl set gently over old gold. He listens to the pulse, and in it hears both lullaby and drumbeat. The forest is not angry. It is inevitable. The water once moved like thought, quick when it needed to be, slow when the land required patience, never lost, never stagnant. Angkor's veins and arteries shimmered in canals and moats, pulling the monsoon's bounty into a rhythm older than the city itself. But somewhere along the endless turning of seasons, the song of water faltered. It began with silt, the soft kind that creeps in unnoticed, laying itself grain by grain along the bottoms of channels. What had been a swift current became a murmur. What had been a murmur became a pause. He walks now along the bank of an abandoned canal, the earth soft with decay. The edges crumble under his steps, spilling into a trickle so faint it could be mistaken for wind. Lotus plants have claimed the middle, their round leaves stacked like forgotten shields. Fishbones lie pale in the mud, too small to have been of use to anyone. Where the water once caught the sun, only dragonflies patrol now, their wings flashing in the still air. A historical truth anchors this silence. Angkor's hydraulic system, an interconnected network of barrays, canals, spillways, and embankments, was one of the most advanced of the medieval world. Its design allowed the empire to capture floodwater in the rainy season and release it slowly through the dry months, ensuring year-round agriculture. It was, in many ways, the empire's hidden throne, for whoever controlled the water controlled the rice, and whoever controlled the rice controlled the kingdom. But the fringe stories speak differently. They tell of a serpent in the canals, a Naga angered by the pride of men, who sent her children to live in the clay banks. Each year, the serpent's brood would shift the earth with their coils, loosening stones, clouding the water. At first, it was only a warning, but when the warnings went unheeded, the Naga began to drink from the reservoirs themselves. She would do it at night, curling her body into the beret and sipping until the moons mirrored on its surface grew dim. By morning, the priests would blame the sun, the wind, the hand of fate, anything but the serpent they feared to name. The mystery for historians is not in the existence of decay, but in its pace. Sediment cores from ancient reservoirs tell a story of sudden shifts, periods of intense flood depositing thick layers of silt in a single season, alternating with years of drought that cracked the clay embankments. Was it climate change, deforestation upstream, or political neglect as wars pulled labor from maintenance and the canals became unpatrolled arteries? Each theory has its champions, but the canals themselves give no clear confession, only layers, like a diary written in water's absence. He reaches a stone spillway, its lintel carved with garlands and apsaras whose faces are mottled with lichen. A fig root has found the joint between two blocks and widened it, bending the spillway like a bow. In the high season, torrents once rushed through here, white and eager, flinging themselves into fields. Now, the channel is a corridor of shade, its floor carpeted with leaves. He stands in the cool hollow and tries to hear the roar that once filled it. All he catches is the echo of his own breath. The city's water was never simply water. It was the stage for festivals, boat races on mirrored surfaces, barges hung with gold silk and parasols. The king himself would appear on the central pavilion of the West Beret, scattering flowers into the waves as an offering to the divine order. Priests chanted from boats that glided without oars, propelled, it was said, by unseen spirits. Children swam among garlands, their laughter skipping like stones. In those days, the canals were not just tools of survival, they were veins of joy. But water has memory, and it remembers roots as well as absences. When the first failures came, a breached embankment here, a clogged spillway there, the water began to wander. It slipped into the jungle's roots, finding the shade preferable to stone. It pooled in forgotten hollows, feeding new forests that rose like green smoke. The canals grew shallow, their banks more inviting to saplings than to fishermen. The people noticed, but perhaps they believed the system too grand to fail. Or perhaps they feared the cost of speaking its fragility aloud. A fisherman's tale survives from the late years, handed down through his descendants. One morning, his net caught not fish, but a broken sandstone face, carved with the eyes of a guardian. He took it as a sign the gods themselves were sinking into the mud. That season, the floods came too high, washing away his rice field. By the next, the drought had left his paddies cracked and pale. He left the city soon after, following a caravan toward the coast. His grandchildren never returned. From the wall of the spillway, a trickle escapes into the undergrowth. He follows it, crouching to watch it vanish beneath the root lattice of a silk cotton tree. The water disappears entirely, swallowed into earth and wood. The tree, impossibly wide at the base, wears the disappearance like a crown, its bark glossy in the light. In that moment, he understands. The jungle has not stolen the water, it has seduced it. The balance between city and forest was always delicate. Angkor's waterworks did not merely resist the jungle, they relied on its restraint. Trees at the edge of the reservoirs held banks firm, the canopy shaded channels from excessive evaporation. But when the system began to fail, the partnership dissolved. Roots that once guarded embankments now pried them apart. The jungle was no longer the city's accomplice, it was its rival. Historians still walk these dry channels, sketching the outlines of vanished currents, measuring how far the water once reached. They find patterns that suggest hurried repairs, embankments doubled in height, spillways reinforced with crude masonry, signs that someone, in those last years, fought to keep the flow alive. Whether they failed because of neglect, disaster, or inevitability is the question that lingers. Perhaps it was all three, each feeding the others until the water gave up on stone entirely. As the sun dips low, the light in the empty canal turns amber, the same color as rice ready for harvest. He imagines the last season when the canal still ran full, the sound of the water at dusk mingling with the bells of oxen returning from the fields. That sound is gone now, replaced by the rustle of leaves, the slow advance of vines down the embankments. The serpent in the stories would be pleased, the naga in the stones, silent, and in the quiet, the jungle leans closer as if to whisper, "Where water goes, life follows, and I have been waiting." Even in an empire that worships order, power speaks most fluently in whispers. He moves through the shaded galleries of the palace, where murals have flaked into constellations of loss, and every corner keeps a secret. Courtiers in white cotton and lacquered hair pass like schools of fish, turning in perfect unison when a higher fin appears. A eunuch glides by with a bronze fan. A scribe hugs a palm leaf bundle as if it were a child. The king's name hangs in the air like incense, palpable, revered, yet in the eddies beneath, other names circulate with softer gravity. The general who feeds soldiers with his own rice, the minister whose face is an argument against trusting smiles, the high priest who knows how to turn a drought into a scripture. He lingers beside a doorway where two attendants exchange news as if it were contraband. Taxes from the northern districts arrive light. A governor downriver builds a second house by the ferry. A frontier temple raises flags with the wrong god's emblem. None of this is rebellion, not yet. It is drift, a loosening of the knot that ties throne to village, city to field. The empire eats by confidence. When confidence thins, even abundance tastes like hunger. A historical fact cuts through the murmur like a gong. In 1177, Cham forces sweep up the Mekong and sack Angkor, barges skewering the moats like spears thrown into a pond. Out of this humiliation rises Jayavarman VII, whose victories drive the invaders out, and whose will rebuilds the city as Angkor Thom, the great city, with the Bayon smiling at its heart. He sponsors hospitals and rest houses along the royal roads, a lattice of compassion stitched into policy. He leans publicly toward Mahayana Buddhism, carving compassion into stone where Shaivite thunder once reigned. For a time, purpose hardens like fired clay, but victory can be a complicating gift. The court fills with men whose claims grow from that triumph, generals with battlefield fame, administrators who proved they could bend chaos into order, priests who wrapped new rites around old altars. Each man's loyalty is sincere until it is tested by proximity to the throne. Each woman of the royal household smiles with grace until the succession becomes arithmetic. In corridors where sunlight breaks into measured squares, alliances assemble and dissolve like dew. The palace rehearses unity with professional skill. Dancers step their stories in perfect sequence. Visits from provincial chiefs unfold in symmetrical protocols of bow and gift. The king's morning audience balances grievances with judgments like scales holding equal grain. Yet after the audience, the courtiers return to shaded cloisters where attendants pour tea and language grows precise. A cousin reminds a cousin that his daughter has reached marrying age. A treasurer notes that the temple at the east gate spends more incense than its alms can explain. A commander mutters that border outposts lack replacement spearheads, though the ironworks ring every night. Whispers wear soft shoes but heavy intentions. Fringe belief lives here too, dressed in court silk. It is said the royal drum, the one struck only to summon the council in crisis, sometimes quivers of its own accord at midnight, as if a ghost hand tests the hide. When it does, scribes record the hour in secret ledgers, and astrologers trace threads on dark cloth to see which constellation tugged the skin. Another tale insists the queen keeps a mirror wrapped in indigo that shows not faces but fortunes. If a minister's features blur when he looks into it, his loyalty will not survive the next flood. No one admits to believing such things, but the drum is kept covered, the mirror wrapped, and footsteps lengthen as midnight approaches. Between faiths, politics finds a trellis. Some nobles, old in Shiva's thunder, look through narrow eyes at the king's Buddhist leanings, the monks in ochre, the sermons of mercy, the statues of Avalokiteshvara distributing 1,000 hands. Others embrace the turn with pious pragmatism, redirecting endowments to monasteries while keeping their land ledgers intact. The city's faces on Bayon towers multiply a message of gentle omniscience. The factories of influence keep hammering in the courtyards below. Piety and ambition are not enemies. They are spouses who quarrel only when the rains refuse to keep the calendar. Mystery climbs the stairs with him to a quiet balcony that overlooks a court where scribes dry wet palm leaves on cords like laundry. Scholars still argue in future centuries about the Bayon's smiling visages. Are they the bodhisattva of compassion, or are they the king himself multiplied into a theology of surveillance? If compassion, then sovereignty softens. If royal self-portrait, then sovereignty acquires 1,000 eyes. Stone does not answer. It smiles. He passes an alcove where a young prince studies a map drawn in red ink, roads like veins, berets like lungs, borders like ribs. A mentor murmurs about duty, about the smoothness of succession, about the necessity of marrying a daughter of a house that hates you. The boy nods as if consent were a muscle he can strengthen. Elsewhere, a princess inspects bolts of silk, approving a color said to please the king's mood. Elsewhere still, a senior consort lights oil before an image and prays for a dream that will place her son in the line of tomorrow. The future is a maze of rooms that all open onto the same courtyard. Outside, news moves with dust. A provincial lord claims wolves took 2 children east of the river. The village swears there are no wolves, only soldiers with poor appetites for patience. A smith in the armory breaks his hand, and no one replaces him for a month because the overseer's nephew wants the job and is waiting for a bribe he is too proud to request. A temple's copper roof goes missing tile by tile, each night a sparrow falling from a flock. No single theft alarms the city. The sum does, and yet dignity continues. On holy days, the king processes through avenues showered with jasmine. Judges take testimony beneath banyans that shade the law into human shapes. Rice arrives by the thousands of baskets and disappears into the bellies that labor for the city's survival. One cannot point to collapse when the bells still ring and the festivals still paint the night gold. Decline in such places is not a cliff, but a gradient disguised by ceremony. A guard tells a story at the edge of the lamp's light, the kind men tell when the wine is gone thin and the hour feels bared to listening. In the hidden heart of the palace, he says, a chamber holds the sacred linga that binds king to God. On nights of great uncertainty, the linga's shadow climbs the wall to a height that tells the priests whether the throne is safe. Once, during a year of flood and fevers, the shadow rose too high, like water surpassing a levee. Priests whispered. The next morning, new edicts emerged, naming new ministers. The flood did not withdraw, but the whispers did. The guard laughs softly, as if to disperse the peril of the story, then falls silent to hear whether the drum might stir. History adds another steadying line. Inscriptions at Ta Prohm, Preah Khan, and other temples praise Jayavarman VII's works and the charity of his mother. After his reign, the momentum of great building slows. Theravada Buddhism takes stronger root in the centuries following, altering ritual, thinning the court's appetite for god-king extravagance. Carvings continue, but fewer hands cut them. Roads still hum, but fewer drums announce cavalcades. The empire does not vanish, it exhales. The debates that matter most now happen in rooms that smell of beetle and calculation. Should the waterworks be restored before the northern road is widened? Should the garrison at the river mouth be reinforced at the expense of canal dredges? Should the priests be allowed to claim more land at the city's edge if they promise to pray for rain with louder bells? Men who love the city try to solve it like a problem that refuses the correct answer. Men who love themselves Try to turn the problem into a ladder. In late afternoon, he watches courtiers leave the palace with faces smooth as uncut stone. They carry their intentions in the tilt of a parasol, the speed of a palanquin, the number of bearers dismissed before the gate. The jungle beyond the fields looks like a quiet audience, patient and numerous, attending a play that runs too long. It has seen 1,000 such acts. It can wait for the curtain. Night gathers. Lamps bloom along colonnades like captured stars. Somewhere, a monk chants a sutra thick with the promise that compassion can outlast error. Somewhere else, a minister counts favors like beads, planning which ones to spend at dawn. The drum does not sound. Perhaps that is mercy. Or perhaps it is simply the pause between breaths, which is when empires decide whether to inhale again or to discover that something else is breathing for them. The rains do not keep their promises. First, a season arrives late, not by weeks but by a heartbeat in the agricultural calendar, the kind of hesitation that farmers feel in their bones. Clouds gather but refuse to break. The rice shoots weighed in paddies turn to dust-cracked mirrors, their tips curling under a sun that has no patience. Wells drop low, and cattle walk farther each day to drink from pools that shrink into rings of mud. From the towers, the king's priests watch the horizon and read the sky as scripture. Their scrolls remember other dry years, but none like this. The Tonle Sap, the empire's breathing lung, inhales without exhaling, its floodwaters barely rising. Berets lie shallow enough to show their stone ribs, dark lines marking where water once kissed the edges. The historical fact is sobering. Evidence in tree rings and sediment cores suggests a decades-long cycle of droughts during the 14th and 15th centuries, interspersed with bursts of catastrophic flooding. The Khmer mastery of water management, so reliable for centuries, faced stresses it was never built to withstand. When the rains failed, the great system faltered, and each year's neglect compounded into the next. In the fringe stories, the drought is not an accident, but a verdict. Some whisper that the Naga princess has turned her face away from the king. Others claim the gods have grown weary of mortal ingratitude, letting the monsoon slip through their fingers. An old tale grows teeth again. If the king does not honor the river spirits with a night of vigil, the sky will drink the rain before it touches earth. Monks walk barefoot to the berets, chanting in lines, their voices rising into the heat like smoke that cannot find wind. He walks through the market at noon, where the stalls that once spilled with green mangoes and sugar palm cakes now hold baskets of dried fish and jars of sour tamarind paste. Women fan themselves with woven palm leaves, the air thick enough to slow even gossip. A boy fills his jar at a trickle from a bamboo pipe and watches every drop as though it were gold. Merchants from the north bring tales of cracked riverbeds where boats lie stranded like bones, their hulls split under the sun. Mystery clings to the margins of these accounts. Why, some ask, did the great city not shift its planting, its canals, its reliance on the old rhythms? Was the empire's system too rigid, or its leaders too certain the rains would return? Inscriptions are silent on this, perhaps too dangerous a topic to carve in stone. The absence itself feels like an answer. By late season, tempers harden. Farmers plead for canal repairs. Officials speak of limited resources. Priests urge more offerings at the shrines. Engineers mutter that incense will not move water uphill. Out in the provinces, some villages keep their harvest for themselves instead of sending the king's share. Patrols grow more frequent, and soldiers return with grain carts that the locals claim were gifts to the temple, though the temples deny ever receiving them. The king orders a great rain festival. The royal elephants are bathed and draped in white cloth. Dancers paint their limbs in blue swirls like streams. At the height of the ceremony, the monarch himself walks barefoot into the shallows of the East Beret, scattering flowers and rice while the court musicians play a rhythm meant to mimic thunder. For a moment, clouds gather thick over the city, and a wind moves through the palms with the sound of rushing water. People look upward, eyes wide with hope, but the clouds pass without breaking, leaving the air hotter than before. In the old stories, such a moment is the pivot on which fate turns. A Cham envoy visiting the city records in his diary that he saw the people's eyes follow the king afterward, not with awe, but with measurement, as though weighing his bond with the heavens. Loyalty, like rice, must be fed. He leaves the beret's edge and walks toward the fields. Where water once stood knee-high, dust now curls around his ankles. The jungle at the edge of cultivation seems to wait, its green deepening, its shadows long and cool. Roots reach into the dry cracks as if tasting the earth for weakness. Insects hum in a pitch that sounds almost like expectation. A farmer tells him of a dream. In it, the great Naga swam through the canals, its body blocking the flow, and in its eyes was the reflection of the king's palace, upside down. He awoke to find his paddy dead. He does not tell this dream to the monks. Dreams like this belong to the forest, not the temple. The city tries to maintain its pageantry. Processions still wind through the gates on holy days, though the flower garlands are thinner and the musicians pause more often for water. The Bayans' smiling faces look down on the streets with their eternal calm, a calm that now feels like detachment. The people bow, but their eyes are quick to return to the sky. Historians will one day argue whether this drought alone could have undone Angkor, or whether it simply loosened the first stones. But standing here, he feels how dryness works, not as a single blow, but as a slow undoing, thread by thread, until the weave of the city no longer holds. Night falls without rain. The stars burn sharp as spear points, and the moonlight spills silver over the empty fields. Somewhere in the forest, a nightjar calls, and the wind carries the scent of dust, a reminder that the jungle knows how to wait for its moment. The drought breaks, but not as a blessing. It begins with clouds that arrive black and swollen, curling over the horizon like an army of shadows. The first drops are heavy enough to bruise leaves, splattering in the dust with the hiss of 1,000 extinguished wicks. The people run from their houses to lift their faces toward the sky, letting the rain soak their hair, their shoulders, their clothes. Laughter rises from the streets, from the fields, from the steps of the temples. After months of thirst, it feels like absolution. But the rain does not stop. For days, the clouds remain nailed to the sky, spilling their weight without pause. The canals, once brittle ribbons of mud, fill to their banks in a matter of hours. At first, the water moves swiftly, eager to return to the rhythm it once knew. Then, as the storm deepens, it begins to churn, brown, restless, carrying leaves, branches, even whole trees wrenched from the earth. The historical record whispers of this reversal. Sediment studies reveal layers of coarse sand and flood debris deposited in a single event, evidence of violent deluges that struck after prolonged drought. The hydraulic network, built for measured release, buckled under the sudden abundance. Spillways were overtopped, embankments breached, and the carefully balanced system became a floodplain. The fringe stories describe it differently. They say the Naga princess returned at last, but her wrath was greater than her mercy. She thrashed her coils through the canals, shattering the clay banks and scattering the stored wealth of the berets into the jungle. Others believe the sky gods fought above the city, and the rain was the blood of their wounds, poured without measure until the land could hold no more. He walks along the northern embankment, where the floodwater pushes against the walls with a dull, endless pressure. Men stand knee-deep in the torrent, straining to place woven baskets of stone against the current. The water laughs at their efforts, prying loose whatever they set down. The air smells of wet earth and panic. Somewhere nearby, a section of canal bank gives way with a sound like a temple roof collapsing. In the market quarter, the streets vanish under a moving mirror. The lower stalls are already submerged, bolts of silk floating like drowned flowers. Children cling to the carved balustrades of bridges, while parents ferry baskets of rice on their heads, wading waist-deep through water that tugs at their legs. The drums in the watchtowers beat in urgent, uneven patterns, calling for laborers to shore up the weakest points. Mystery still shrouds why these floods struck so fiercely. Was it the monsoon's revenge for years of absence? Was deforestation upstream releasing the rain in destructive torrents instead of steady flows? Or had the network, neglected during the years of drought, lost the resilience to channel such power? The answers lie buried in silt that will take centuries to read. The palace sends orders for all available hands to the embankments. Soldiers march out, their armor clinking, their faces pale with the knowledge that this is not an enemy they can fight with blades. Monks walk in single file through the rain, carrying incense sticks that sputter in the downpour, chanting for the spirits of the water to relent. But the chants are swallowed by the wind, their syllables scattered like petals. He finds himself on the great causeway to Angkor Wat, now a path of slick stone with water curling around its edges. The reflection of the towers in the flooded moat is fractured, rippled, as though the city's image itself is breaking apart. Somewhere deep in the sanctuary, the statues stand dry, but outside, the world is dissolving. By nightfall, parts of the outer districts are unreachable. Wooden houses lean in the current, their stilts bending under the strain. Bridges sag, their Naga balustrades dipping their stone heads into the flood as if in mourning. In the villages along the eastern canals, people climb onto the roofs of granaries, keeping their rice above the water's hungry reach. A fisherman shouts to him from a small boat, the vessel tossing on waves that have no business existing in a city's streets. The man swears he saw an entire shrine lifted from its foundation and carried away, its guardian statues still kneeling inside as it drifted toward the jungle. Whether true or not, the image sticks. The gods themselves abandoning their posts, carried by the very water they once commanded. Historians will one day note that these floods likely damaged key links in the system, a breached embankment here, a collapsed spillway there, but in the moment, such technical truths are meaningless. To those in the water, the city is not a network of engineering, it is a sinking body. The rain continues into the small hours, drumming against roof tiles, splashing into courtyards, hammering the carved lintels of temples. The jungle on the horizon glistens under the storm, its green deepened to black. Roots drink from the swollen ground, vines sway like serpents in the wind. The forest does not retreat from the water, it welcomes it, sending tendrils into every breach, every softened wall. By dawn, the flood begins to recede, but the damage is done. Whole stretches of canal have become unrecognizable, their banks scoured away, their channels choked with debris. The city's veins are broken in multiple places, and the water that remains is trapped in stagnant pools, breeding fever in the days to come. In the silence after the storm, he walks through streets still slick with mud, past doorways marked by the high line of the flood. People sweep silt from their thresholds, their faces turned toward the work because looking at the horizon is too much to bear. And on that horizon, the jungle seems closer than it was before, as if it had taken a step forward while the city was busy fighting the water. The elephants had always been the empire's heartbeat, their tread a slow drumbeat of authority, their presence a living banner of the king's reach. They carried generals into battle, timber from the forest, stone from the quarries, and treasures for festivals. Their silhouettes moved like hills in motion, each step pressing the king's will into the earth. To see them march through Angkor's gates was to feel the city's veins fill with power. But now the sound is thinning. At dawn, he walks to the royal elephant stables, a long colonnade of laterite and wood where the air once trembled with the low rumbles of their speech. In the cool shade, only a handful remain, older animals with hollowed temples and eyes the color of rain-washed stone. Their chains lie slack, their keepers move without the briskness of men whose charges are many. The rest are gone. Some taken to distant provinces where unrest stirs, others sent to guard border roads, and more, so the stablemaster admits in a lowered voice, released into the forest when the cost of feeding them grew too heavy for the treasury. The historical truth confirms their importance. In the Khmer military and economy, elephants were not just symbols, but engines. They hauled the massive sandstone blocks from Phnom Kulen to the city, and they broke through enemy lines like living siege towers. In royal hunts, their presence was as ceremonial as it was practical, displaying a mastery over the wild that mirrored the king's command over his subjects. But the fringe stories take a stranger turn. Villagers at the jungle's edge claim the released elephants do not roam aimlessly. They gather in silent processions deep beneath the canopy, moving toward an ancient clearing where a spirit king of elephants dwells. They say these gatherings are not for feeding or mating, but for listening, as if the jungle itself speaks to them. Some even whisper that the elephants are returning to the service of an older ruler, one whose throne is made of roots and rivers, not stone and gold. He follows the path northward, where the trees begin to close over the road. In the soft mud, he sees the prints of an elephant, larger than any in the royal stables, leading away from the city. The tracks are accompanied by smaller prints, calves perhaps, but no keeper's footprints. Ferns spring back over the trail behind him as if the forest itself wants to erase their passage. Mystery coils around this absence. Were the elephants truly released, or did they leave of their own accord, guided by some instinct sharper than loyalty? Historians will one day debate whether disease, neglect, or a shift in the economy made their upkeep impossible. But standing here, the emptiness feels intentional, as if the city's great beasts have foreseen a tide the humans will not admit is rising. In the streets, the absence is noticed in subtler ways. Ceremonial processions feel smaller, less alive. The great hunts into the forest are canceled or conducted with fewer riders. Builders at the temple sites speak in frustration about delays, for without the elephants, stones must be dragged by doubled teams of oxen. Even the sounds of the city change. The deep, resonant footfalls replaced by the lighter clatter of hooves and the creak of wooden carts. One old mahout tells him a story as they walk past the quiet paddocks. Years ago, during a rare night of full moon and heavy rain, the royal elephants began to trumpet wildly in their stalls, straining against their chains. No storm, no fire, no intruder could be found. Then, just before dawn, they went silent all at once, lifting their trunks toward the forest as if scenting something far away. The mahout swears that 3 days later, news arrived of a distant temple collapsing under the weight of vines and roots. "They hear things we do not," the man says, stroking the scarred flank of the last great tusker in his care. The jungle seems to echo this claim. At the edge of the moat where the water glints under a pale sun, he sees an elephant's shadow move between the trees, too far to follow. The figure pauses, turns its head, and then melts into the green without a sound. He cannot tell if it is real or a trick of the light, but the stillness that follows feels heavier than before. History shows that elephants were once the empire's instruments of projection. Their ability to move stone, goods, and armies kept Angkor's reach long. Without them, the logistical heart of the kingdom slows. Roads take longer to patrol, construction falters, and even festivals lose their grandeur. This weakening is not dramatic. It is the slow dimming of a flame when the wick is shortened. The fringe belief deepens. In some villages, people leave offerings of sugarcane and bananas at forest shrines, asking the Elephant King to intercede for rain or protection from disease. These shrines often hold carvings older than Angkor itself, rough, almost totemic, but worn smooth by generations of hands. The implication is clear. The elephants have another allegiance, one that predates the empire and will survive it. In the late afternoon, he stands on the terrace of the elephants. The carved beasts march endlessly in stone, their tusks unbroken, their flanks proud. They are eternal here, frozen mid-stride in a world that still belongs to them. But in the real city, their absence leaves a silence that even the jungle seems to notice. Somewhere in that silence, he thinks he hears the low, distant rumble of their voices, not from the city, but from the forest, where the wild is gathering its strength. When he leaves the terrace, the sky over the jungle has turned the deep green of an approaching storm. If the elephants have truly returned to the forest's service, then the empire has lost more than muscle. It has lost one of its oldest alliances. And the jungle, patient as ever, now holds the loyalty of the beasts that once carried the king's throne on their backs. He enters a precinct where breath once kept time with bells. The gate towers stand with their faces unreadable, and the first court is a hush of leaf crackle and gecko tick. Where incense once fanned upward in blue veils, damp air hangs heavy, sweet with rot and the faint memory of resin. He steps across thresholds worn concave by pilgrim feet and finds the sanctuaries dim, the oil lamps long dry, the altars furred with moss so plush it feels like sleep. Temples do not die, he realizes, they drowse, and in their drowse the gods grow quiet. In an outer gallery, apsaras smile from the walls, their stone anklets buried beneath lichen that glitters like frost. They still dance, or rather, the suggestion of their dance still ripples in the hips, in the wrists. But where worship once translated that movement into meaning, vines now provide the choreography, curling in slow phrases along the bas-reliefs. A strangler fig lowers roots through a broken skylight. They touch the floor like a priest's fingers blessing the ground. The temple accepts the embrace without protest. It is difficult to tell if this is surrender or a new rite. He crosses into a cloistered walk, its roofline scalloped by the appetite of time. Raindrops fall through gaps and leave dark coins on the stone. Here a historical truth speaks through the silence. Taprom, consecrated in 1186 by Jayavarman VII to honor his mother, once listed in its inscription, a service population so large it reads like a small nation, thousands of attendants, hundreds of dancers, storehouses brimming with rice and gold, honey and cloth. Temples were not only prayer, they were administration, economy, theater, archive. Their loss is not only spiritual, it is structural. And yet the fringe belief keeps a different ledger. In village talk, these sanctuaries become houses of sleeping gods. People say that when a temple's last lamp goes out, the deity does not depart. It lies down within the stone and dreams the city back to green. If offerings are left, a handful of rice, a coil of areca leaf, the god may dream rain. If the sanctum is disturbed, the god dreams roots. The old women warn children not to play in the inner courts after sunset. The gods, half asleep, might mistake small feet for the patter of thieves and send snakes to tie the lesson to the ankle. He pauses at a doorway darkened by bats, and the air ruffles with their soft leather. In the sanctum beyond, a pedestal waits, its deity long removed, to another shrine, to a collector's boat, to a story that lost its ending. A faint groove circles the plinth like a moat. He imagines the lamp that once circled it each dawn and dusk, carried by a novice with hands trembling from devotion, not fear. Now, a single fern grows from the pedestal's seam, its fronds the green of first plans. Mystery walks beside him with unhurried sandals. Scholars argue over the tempo of fading. Did the priests leave in a season, a flood, a war? Or did the temple shed functions like a tree shedding leaves? Courtly prestige first, then festivals, then liturgy, until one morning the custodian did not return with the key. Inscriptions thin in late centuries. Theravada monks take the halls more simply. The extravagant god-king rites soften to everyday compassion. Ceremonies shrink to human scale. Was this peaceful transformation, or a quiet acknowledgement that the old order lacked the rice to sustain itself? The stones offer both stories and keep both true. He circles a library building where a silk cotton tree has launched its buttresses like sails around the walls, pinning them with roots as broad as causeways. The trunk rises through what was once a roof, and out in the light the crown tosses green coins to the wind. He lays his palm to the bark. It is warm, breathing, untroubled by theology. The jungle does not desecrate, it revises. Beyond, a monk's cell row opens onto a pond dusted with duckweed. A cracked alms bowl sits inverted on a step, filled now with rain. He hears a water hen tisk along the edge and leaves the bowl as he found it. Devotion endures in small obediences. Do not reorder what time has ordered. In the cloister's shadow, a lizard lifts its head as if to acknowledge a procession that no longer passes. It blinks and resumes its own liturgy of stillness. From the central courtyard, a staircase climbs to a tower whose cornices are scalloped by the patient nibbling of seasons. He climbs. At the upper landing, wind moves across the opening with a voice like a low hymn. The view is a textbook of reclamation. Causeways veiled by creepers, gopuras shouldered by trees, galleries like vertebrae half buried in green. He thinks of the temple's old inventory, the dancers, the stores, the scribes, and then of the present inventory, hornbills, vines, beetles, shade. No court would accept this trade, and yet the forest does, without bargaining. There is a story the tour guides never agree on, told mostly when the day's heat persuades certainty to nap. A certain temple, they say, wakes once every 100 years. Not fully, only enough to turn one corridor back into what it was, lamps lit, doors oiled, frescoes filling with color. The gods sit up and look upon the world. If they see righteousness, they lean back and sleep for another century. If they see neglect, they breathe out, and where their breath touches, roots thicken. He smiles at the tale's economy, a moral hidden in a maintenance schedule. He descends into a side court where a lintel lies on the ground, guardian of nothing. Its carving shows the churning of the ocean, devas and asuras hauling the serpent across the mount to coax Amrita from chaos. He runs a thumb along the grooves where hands once etched muscles into myth. The story is a promise. Endurance can make nectar from turmoil. The temple, asleep, continues the experiment, drawing slow sweetness from leaf rot and rain until its stones glimmer again, this time with algae. A factual observation threads like a reed through water. In later centuries, some complexes receive modest repairs even as others fall away. Pagodas rise within old enclosures, small wooden halls appear where galleries open to sky. Continuity does not die, it changes clothing. The debate remains whether these gestures were attempts to hold on or to let go with ceremony, to direct piety into forms a leaner age could afford. Records leave room for both readings. Room is the one resource no temple lacks. He lingers at a doorway where a spider has stretched geometry into poetry. Dew beads the threads until the web seems strung with tiny bells. When a breeze moves, the bells do not ring. They flash. He laughs softly at the trick, and the sound comes back from the sanctum as a stranger's chuckle. In such places, even one's own voice feels borrowed. Near the outer wall, he finds a small shrine still kept, a clay bowl with charcoal and a garland so fresh it glows. Someone comes at dawn, then, to offer breath to the sleeping. The bowl ambers a bit of smoke when he stirs it. The scent is resinous and brave. He bows without words. One need not wake a god to say thank you. On his way out, he touches the threshold with the care of a scribe closing a book. The jungle hums beyond the gate, patient and unhurried. Behind him, the temple exhales. He does not know if he has left a sanctuary or entered one. The difference, like the line between worship and weather, has blurred. What remains is this: where priests once tended lamps, leaves now polish stone. Where choirs once braided syllables into ladders, rain heaps its drum on every surface. Where gods once received a city's anxieties, roots now hold the walls like arms around a sleeping body. The empire's prayer does not stop. It changes languages. And somewhere, in that change, the jungle learns to pronounce the names the people engraved, not with tongues, but with shadow and coolness. He steps back into the day. A bird scolds him from a lintel, as if to say the service is ongoing, though the hymn book has turned to green. He nods, accepts the correction, and listens as the wind leafs through the pages of stone, finding lines that no hand wrote and reading them aloud. It begins as a defiance, a decision to laugh in the face of endings. The royal court declares a festival, grander than any in recent memory, as if the sound of drums and the shimmer of gold could seal the cracks in the empire's foundations. Messengers ride out to every province, carrying word that the capital will host a celebration of the gods, of the king, of the city itself. Let there be dancing until dawn, they say. Let the streets blaze with torches. Let every spirit, mortal and divine, be reminded that Angkor still breathes. In the days before the festival, the city stirs with the energy of preparation. Markets swell with traders selling sugarcane, garlands, and bolts of dyed silk. Blacksmiths hammer bronze gongs until their arms ache. Women pound rice into flour for sweet cakes, their bangles chiming with each strike. Along the causeways, servants string banners dyed in the royal colors, deep vermilion and gold, so that the wind carries the empire's pride across the moats. A historical truth gives weight to the scene. Inscriptions from Angkor's later centuries describe lavish festivals tied to both Hindu and Buddhist calendars, where the king appeared in person to reaffirm his bond with the people and the gods. These events were as much political theater as devotion, drawing the population together in a display of unity. Even in decline, the Khmer court understood the power of spectacle. The fringe stories, however, offer a different frame. In village memory, the last festival was not simply celebration, but bargaining, a way to coax the favor of unseen powers for just one more year of abundance. They say the Naga princess was invited to attend, her place reserved in the shadows of the main pavilion, where a single cushion lay untouched all night. In some tellings, she came and sat, unseen but felt, her coils cold against the wooden floor. In others, she did not come at all, and the cushion remained empty until dawn. By evening, the city is transformed. Torches line the roads like molten rivers, casting light onto the carved faces of gate towers. The Bayon's serene smiles flicker in the glow, seeming almost to shift in the dance of firelight. Musicians gather in the courtyards with drums, gongs, and long flutes. Their music is a weave of thunder and breath. The air is thick with the scent of grilled fish, roasted pork, and perfumed oil warming in bronze lamps. He moves among the crowds, feeling the press of bodies, the hum of anticipation. Children dart between the legs of dancers, clutching candied fruit. Monks in ochre robes walk through the throng, blessing those who press palms together in greeting. On the terraces of Angkor Wat, Apsara dancers in gilded headdresses move in lines, their hands curling through sacred gestures that tell the story of creation and protection. The king watches from a throne draped in gold cloth, his silhouette framed by the great central tower. His face is unreadable in the torchlight. Mystery hovers at the edges of the celebration. Even as the streets pulse with music, some notice the absence of certain provincial delegations. A few temples on the outskirts remain dark, their priests absent from the festivities. Near the north gate, a line of carts passes quietly into the night, their contents hidden under cloth, grain perhaps, or treasures being moved somewhere safer. The city is dancing, but not everyone is watching the stage. Midnight comes, and the festival reaches its crescendo. Fireworks, small, bright flares of burning powder, burst above the temples, briefly turning the stone towers into silhouettes against a white sky. The crowds cheer, their voices rolling through the moats and over the walls. The king rises, lifting a cup of rice wine, and the music falls silent. He speaks words that no one will later agree upon. Some remember a blessing for the city's eternal life. Others recall a plea for the gods to hold back the jungle. Still others say he said nothing at all, only raised the cup and drank, his eyes fixed on the dark line of the forest. The historical accounts, scant as they are, end with the description of a grand offering. Flowers cast into the east beret, incense lit in every shrine, dancers continuing until the first light of dawn. Yet the fringe tales add an ending the records omit. As the last drumbeats faded, a wind rose from the direction of the jungle, cold enough to gutter the torches. For a moment, the city stood in near darkness, the crowd hushed, listening. Some swore they heard the deep rolling call of elephants far away, though none remained in the city. Others heard nothing but the rustle of leaves. By morning, the festival is over. The streets are littered with petals and ash. Banners hang limp, their bright dye dulled by dew. The people return to their work, their voices quieter now. The city still stands, but something in the air has shifted. A wait, a pause, as though the jungle has marked the date and made its own plans. From the steps of the terrace, he looks toward the forest. In the daylight, it seems no closer than before, but the memory of last night's wind lingers. It is a reminder that joy can be both genuine and desperate, and that sometimes a festival is not a celebration of what is, but of what one hopes will not be lost. Night gathers like a verdict. Torches along the outer walls throw wavering halos onto stone, and the watchman's calls travel the perimeter in a broken necklace of sound. He stands beneath a gate tower whose four faces glow and fade as firelight licks their cheeks. The city has celebrated. The petals of the last festival still stick to damp flagstones. Now, at the hour when songs usually soften into sleep, the bells on the ramparts begin to speak a different grammar, short, clipped, repeating. The signal for attention, not alarm, not yet. At first, rumor is the thing that arrives. A cart from the north is stopped at the gate and searched. Beneath bundles of saltfish lie bundles of iron spearheads, unlicensed and badly hidden. A messenger from a river outpost reaches the palace with cracked lips and words he can barely string together. Raiders seen, or patrols missing, or fires in granaries that should not have burned. Nothing confirmed. Everything plausible. The guards double at the gates, and the captains pace the galleries with hands clasped behind their backs, as if binding their own doubt. He watches the causeway beyond the moat. Darkness beyond the torches is not merely absence, it is a presence with patience. In the distance, something moves with the steady rhythm of feet, too many to be a patrol, too measured to be a herd. The sound grows, stops, grows again. Each time it resumes, the gate bells answer with a harder tone. The city inhales, no one breathes it out. A historical fact sharpens the night. Chronicles from the Ayutthaya kingdom record a campaign against Angkor in the early 15th century, culminating in a sack around 1431. After this crisis, royal authority and population concentrate farther south along the rivers that lead to the sea. Whether the gates fell by siege, by famine, or by negotiation remains debated, but the memory of "a night the gates closed" clings like moss to stone. The history is a silhouette, the detail is the work of rumor and rain. Fringe belief borrows the moment and dresses it in shadow. Old women mutter that what comes to the walls tonight walks without breath, the spirits of the forest summoned by neglected shrines, led by a queen with green hair whose feet never touch the ground. Others whisper of the Naga princess, insulted beyond patience, coiling around the city's moats to squeeze the last loyalty from its stones. A monk lowers his voice to say that when elephants leave a city, the ancestors come to fetch the living in their place. The guard beside him laughs too loudly and then refuses to meet anyone's eyes. On the ramparts, archers string their bows. The cords creak like old doors. A captain orders buckets of sand set beside every torch. If fire arrows fall, the flames must be smothered quickly. Runners go to the powder storehouses, then return with the news no one wanted. The flood months ruin some of the stock, and what remains clumps in the damp. The captain nods, as if acknowledging a late bill he cannot pay tonight. From the courtyard below, families begin to drift toward the inner city, carrying what they can. Bundles of cloth, jars of water, babies wrapped like precious manuscripts. A temple bell tolls a single slow note. It has the wrong pitch for celebration, the right one for inventory. The gates stay open, but soldiers stand just inside them now, their spears planted, their faces young in the firelight. The boy nearest him touches a charm at his throat, a bead of carnelian wrapped in cotton. It belonged to his grandmother, who said it kept snakes from the path. He wears it to keep fear from the throat. Mystery moves among the facts. Did the court anticipate this approach for weeks and fail to act, paralyzed by rivalry and drought? Or did an enemy circle faster than scouts could report, taking advantage of broken roads and broken canals? Some say a treaty was offered and refused. Others say it was accepted and then betrayed before ink dried. The records do not agree. Even the date of the crisis drifts across calendars like a boat across floodwater. The certainty is only this: a city built to outlast seasons now confronts a night that measures endurance by heartbeats. He climbs to the gatehouse where the winch sits, a square, honest thing of timber and rope. Men stand ready to lower the portcullis if commanded. The captain tells them to wait. The last carts of grain must enter. The last line of monks must pass. The last messenger must return from the southern road with word of whether boats have been set to receive evacuees, if evacuees must exist. The men's hands hover above wood, and in their stillness the whole city seems to balance. One finger of pause pressed against the mouth of consequence. Beyond the moat, voices rise, not chant, not song, but the sound of men speaking in a language that is not this city's. Torches waver, reflections shatter on the water. A horn blows once, flat and practical. The captain gives the signal. The winch turns with a groan, and the gate's wooden belly descends. Iron teeth bite into sockets cut a century ago by craftsmen who assumed their work would protect feasts, not memories. The chain rattles and the portcullis lands with a shudder that runs through stone into bone. The gates are closed. Inside, the sound changes. The city is a held breath. Somewhere, a woman begins to pray aloud to Avalokiteshvara. Somewhere else, a young man recites a hymn to Shiva just in case. Faith hedges its bets on nights like this. A priest asks for oil to relight a lamp that was never allowed to go out. The lamp sputters, flares, holds. In the granaries, rats skitter. In the palaces, doors are barred with bars that have not moved since the last invasion generations ago. They fit poorly. Hands wedge them into place with wooden mallets whose handles have dried and cracked in recent droughts. He looks down at the moat. It holds, but the far shore is a net of silhouettes. Ladders, perhaps, saplings dragged and bound, or just the posture of men waiting for an order. He cannot tell. Arrows hiss from the dark and hiss again, stitching shallow angles into water. A few thud into the portcullis and quiver like insects dying. The archers answer, and someone out there cries out, not in rage but surprise. The sound makes no difference to the night. A runner arrives with a packet from the inner court, a sealed leaf smeared with a signet. The captain breaks it, reads, breathes out through his nose. The order is simple. Hold until dawn. If the outer city is not breached by then, open the eastern gate to evacuate the infirm and the young toward the river. The captain repeats it to his men as if it were good news. It is not bad news. It is a plan, and plans are currency. Fringe belief slips between orders with catfoot grace. An attendant swears the great drum in the deepest hall throbbed once without touch, answering the pulse of the jungle. Another insists that during the last offering at the inner shrine, the flame leaned not toward the king, as is customary, but toward the eastern door, as if pointing the way. A third says he saw a white deer in the palace court at dusk, a sign of change in every story he knows. The captain hears them all and orders more sand for the torches. The mystery that will trouble scholars later is not whether Angkor faced enemies, it did, but whether the city died tonight or only began to move its soul. Some inscriptions from later centuries in the south speak of kings and monks whose lineage flows from Angkor like a river that decides the sea is its better destiny. Was this retreat strategy or surrender? Did the city fall and the culture endure by migration, or did it bargain its bones for time? The stones under his feet cannot answer. They bear weight, they do not bear witness. Past midnight, the rain begins. Not a deluge, not the punishment of Section 8, but a quiet, steady fall that slicks the stones and dampens the torch smoke into ribbons. The archers wipe their bowstrings with cloth. The enemy beyond the moat does not press. Perhaps they wait for ladders to arrive. Perhaps they wait for fear to do its work from within. Patience is a weapon, and it is honed by silence. He descends the stairs and walks the inner street. Families sleep sitting up, their backs against walls, their bundles beside them. A girl holds a clay figurine of an apsara whose arms are broken. She has wrapped cloth around the stump so the dancer will not be cold. At a small shrine by the gate, an old man feeds the lamp with the last of his oil, regardless that dawn is hours away. He says he promised his wife to keep that flame alive as long as he breathes. He smiles to show he remembers what promises are for. Toward the second hour before dawn, the horn beyond the moat blows twice. Lines surge in the dark. The first ladder's foot meets stone with a thud he feels in teeth. The archers draw. The captain lifts his hand. The order is given. Fire arrows arc and sow orange into wet air. Men shout. Somewhere to the south a cry goes up, answered in the east, then in the west, mirrors of alarm or feints, or both. The city becomes a circle of decisions. He realizes that this night will be told later as a single story, but living it is 1,000 tiny plots tugging at the same breath. When the horizon finally pales, it does so without optimism. The light reveals what the dark concealed, and also what it exaggerated. The moat still lies between the city and its enemy. The ladders that reach the wall smolder. The ladders still on the far bank wait like spare choices. The archer's fingers bleed from string and rain. The captain looks to the east, toward the road that leads to the river. He nods. The order passes. Open the lesser gate for the first line of evacuees. The great gate remains shut for now. As the smaller gate creaks, the jungle exhale flows into the city like a cool thought. Children blink at the green beyond the wall as at a story finally admitted to be true. Carry what you can, the soldiers say, and walk fast but not in panic. Behind them, men at the winch keep hands ready. The city has not fallen, it is moving. The bells change their message again. Not alarm now, but measure. They count people as they pass, a tally against disappearance. Dawn touches the faces on the gate tower. In their smiles, he thinks he sees not serenity, but endurance, the patient curve of things that have learned to survive by changing their names. The jungle does not storm the city like an army. It advances like a tide. One root here, a tendril there, a sapling's shadow stretching just a little farther each day. While the people look toward the roads and rivers for the next wave of invaders, the green frontier creeps forward quietly, colonizing what the moat no longer guards. At the outer temples, he sees the first signs. A fig tree's roots nudging between the joints of a causeway, curling around the Naga balustrades as if testing their strength. The moss that once clothed only the shaded walls now grows on pillars that stand in full sun, emboldened by the moisture left by the long rains. The moat's far bank is already softened, its sharp lines melting into slopes of fern and leaf litter. The historical truth is plain in the stones. Aerial surveys in the modern era reveal that after Angkor's abandonment as a political capital, vegetation overtook the temple complexes in layers, some structures vanishing entirely beneath canopy. The hydraulic network, once cleared seasonally, silted and became marshland, giving root to the very trees that would pry apart its embankments. The process took decades, not days, but from within, each change must have felt both sudden and inevitable. Fringe belief colors this reality in richer hues. Elders speak of the marriage of stone and root, the moment when a tree chooses a temple as its host. From that day forward, the two are bound. To cut the tree is to wound the temple. To dismantle the temple is to kill the tree. In such unions, the gods of the forest and the gods of the city are said to share a single breath. It is not a conquest, but a wedding, though the vows are spoken in a language no human mouth can form. He walks into an abandoned courtyard, its flagstones cracked into a mosaic of weeds. Here, a strangler fig has claimed a shrine whole. Its roots pour over the lintel like a frozen waterfall, anchoring themselves into the floor within. The walls bulge outward where the trunk has thickened over decades, stone and wood now inseparable. Inside, the air is dim and damp, the smell of leaf mold stronger than any trace of incense. A single shaft of light falls from a hole in the roof, illuminating a headless statue, its body draped in green shadow. The mystery for historians lies in how much of this was avoidable. Was the retreat from certain quarters a deliberate concession, a way to concentrate resources in the city's core, or did the jungle's arrival simply outpace the will to resist it? No records speak of surrendering ground to trees, but inscriptions thin and maintenance logs vanish. Some temples are last mentioned in stone one year and gone beneath foliage within a lifetime. The silence is an answer of its own kind. In the marketplace, the green encroachment is subtler. Vines creeping up the posts of abandoned stalls, wild banana plants sprouting where the paving is cracked. Birds not seen in the city for generations return, their calls bright and strange against the low murmur of the crowd. Children chase them without knowing they are heralds of change. A woodcutter tells him a tale over a shared pot of rice. One morning, in the mist, he saw an entire section of the city wall bowed outward, not by siege, but by the pressure of a silk cotton tree's buttress root. The stones had shifted, but not fallen, and in the gap, he glimpsed a patch of deep forest beyond, green as the inside of a jewel. He swears he saw movement there, not human, not animal, but something that stepped forward and then back, as if measuring the opening. He turned away and did not go back. He climbs a tower at the edge of the city to see the scale of the change. From here, the forest is no longer a wall beyond the fields. It is a series of fingers reaching into the city's fabric. Some follow the dry beds of canals, reclaiming the roots water once took. Others creep along neglected causeways, wrapping their roots around the stones as if leading them away. The pattern is not random. It is the map of the city drawn anew in green. The historical fact and the fringe story meet in the same image. Ta Prohm, Beng Mealia, and other temples where trees and stone now live as one. In these places, modern visitors marvel at the sight, but for the people of the late empire, such sights must have been uneasy omens. A temple still standing yet bound in roots is neither alive nor dead, a reminder that permanence can be redefined. Mystery stirs again. Some of the roots, when cut, are found to have grown around offerings, clay jars, beads, coins, placed deliberately into the cracks. Were these meant to appease the forest, to pay for safe passage of its advance? Or were they parting gifts to the gods before leaving their houses to new tenants? The jungle does not answer. By dusk, the chorus of cicadas is so loud it seems to come from the stones themselves. Shadows lengthen, and the outlines of towers blur into the treetops. In the gloaming, he sees what the villagers mean by the marriage, the way root and wall lean into each other, indistinguishable in the fading light. It is beautiful in a way that resists sentiment, a beauty that accepts no hierarchy between what was built and what simply grew. He understands then that the jungle's reclamation is not an event, but a transformation, one the city participates in, even as it loses itself. Stone yields without breaking, root embraces without letting go. The marriage is slow, patient, and entirely without the need for witnesses. But the jungle keeps them anyway, in the form of wind, rain, and the occasional man who climbs a tower to watch the vows being spoken in silence. At first, silence enters like a guest with soft feet. It stands just inside the gate, listening to itself, and finds that the city answers with echoes rather than voices. He walks the avenue where bells once counted hours. Their brackets are still there, bronze cheeks dark with weather, tongues gone or stilled. When wind moves, a few give off a dry clink, not a note, only the memory of one. Dogs sleep on thresholds that no longer divide shop from street. A palm leaf ledger, half curled, lies in dust like a molted skin. The afterlife of noise is arrangement. Insects take the high parts, doves the low, leaves the middle. The city tunes itself to green. He passes a house on stilts whose ladder is pulled up forever. An ox cart stands beneath, spokes furred with lichen. On a wall, a child's charcoal game grid fades, its squares invaded by ants. Someone left in a hurry, but not a panic. Someone lifted the pot from the hearth and poured out the rice rather than let it sour. Someone tied a red thread around a doorpole to ask whatever remains to be gentle. He recognizes the inventory of departures, not ruin, but unmaking. A historical fact steadies the air. After the early 15th century crisis, Khmer royal power concentrates downriver. The political heart migrates toward the floodplain, laced to the sea, and later to positions like Longvek and eventually Phnom Penh. Theravada Buddhism continues to shape daily life, but the God-King theater thins, the great building projects halt, and Angkor endures as sacred terrain rather than a humming capital. The glory does not end, it relocates. Yet a fringe story stipples that fact with moonlight. Villagers say that on certain nights the bells inside Bayan's faces ring by themselves, impossibly far away, a sound as fine as silk thread. They say apsaras descend into the empty galleries to dance without witness, their anklets inaudible, their laughter like moth wings. They say the jungle, moved by pity, tells the temple's bedtime stories about the years when fires burned in every courtyard. In those tellings, absence is attended, not abandoned. Mystery sits with him in the cloister's shade and refuses to leave. Why did the people go as they did? By threads, then by ropes, then by the last cords that tie a family to a doorway. Did war push from without, while water failed from within? Did trade with the sea call louder than inland rice, tempting the court to turn its face to harbors and tides? Or did the city's own complexity, once its crown, become its brittleness when seasons defied predictions? The evidence is a quilt with missing squares. Every arrangement of the remaining pieces tells a slightly different warmth. He finds priests' quarters turned to swallow halls. Clay lamps sit like fossils on shelves. A line of footprints, hardened in the mud of a long-ago flood, crosses a corridor and vanishes under a slide of fallen plaster. A woman with a small foot, a child, a man carrying something heavy. He tries to give back their names and fails. The jungle gives them something better than names: shade. Shade endures. By the old armory, a banyan has made an archive of air, roots descending in pale curtains, each strand a letter too cursive for stone. He pushes through, and the temperature drops like reverence. The floor is a carpet of seeds and bronze flakes. He picks up a fragment of a blade, its edge eaten soft. War does not retire here, it rusts into allegory. The marketplace opens like a paused breath. Roofs are gone, but stall posts stand in neat ranks, as if discipline outlives purpose. He sees a bead crushed into dirt, blue enough to be from far coasts. Traders once argued in a dozen tongues, now butterflies patrol the aisles. He hears the city speaking in the tents reserved for once. Once spices sugared the air, once silk hissed, once salt came down from the mountain like a blessing and went out again like a promise. Now the jungle speaks in the tents reserved for always. Another historical line threads the afternoon. By the 16th century, travelers from abroad record Angkor's monuments as ruins embraced by forest, splendid and haunted. Local pilgrimage persists, shrines burn oil again under simpler roofs, and the old cosmologies breathe through new forms. Continuity bends, not breaks. A people remembers with their feet even when their throne shifts its chair. But belief keeps its own ledger. A monk tells him the city fell not to sword or drought, but to forgetfulness, that the king one night failed to dream the Naga princess, and without that dream, the pact unstitched. Since then, she is said to swim the moat in a patient circle, keeping fish fat and stones wet, waiting for a sovereign who knows the correct name of rain. It is a parable with mud under its fingernails. He walks to a pool that once mirrored pavilions. The mirror is cracked with lotus leaves, but the sky still finds itself there. A kingfisher detonates a line of blue across the surface and vanishes into green. He realizes the city has not ceased to be a capital. It has changed its citizens. Ants inherit corridors, geckos inherit ceilings, vines inherit titles. The succession is peaceful because the new court requires no proclamations. Mystery returns in the form of a doorway that faces nothing. The building behind it is gone, yet the jambs remain, carved with flower scroll and little devas who raise their hands forever. Who stepped here last as a resident rather than a visitor? Did she lay her palm where his now rests, feeling the same coolness? Did she think the city would recover as it always had? Collapse is only visible from a distance in time. Up close, it feels like a season out of step. Evening gathers in layers. The bells, those that remain, do not ring. Instead, frogs lift the hour. Bats turn the sky into handwriting. From deep in the forest comes a thunder with no storm. The sound of a great tree giving way, a cathedral falling sideways. The wind brings the scent of torn green. Somewhere, a shrine lamp pricks open, a saffron seed of fire sown into the moss. A woman murmurs a prayer over rice, and the sound comes to him as water does when it chooses a path. He sits on the temple steps. In the hush, he hears inventories become elegies, and elegies become instructions. Keep the door lintels clear of fallen limbs. Offer flowers even if no one sees. Teach children to bow to stone and to leaf with the same spine. The empire that built the city is gone from these streets, but the civilization that learned from it still moves, downriver, inland, into chant, into custom, into the names of rain. One last fact steadies the dark. Angkor endures not merely as ruin, but as axis, a place to which memory returns to measure itself. Pilgrims still come. Scholars kneel to read sand. Craftsmen copy a curve, first cut by a hand 8 centuries earlier. The jungle keeps the archive closed most days, but it lends pages to the diligent. The fringe story closes the ledger with a softer ink. They say that when no human ear is near, the bells do ring, not to mark hours, but to remind the roots how time once sounded. The roots answer by holding the walls a little longer. He decides to believe this, for belief is also a brace. Night completes the silence the bells began. The city listens to the jungle breathe, and in that breathing he understands. What vanished here has not died. It has changed address. The throne refuses to be empty. It has simply broadened until it is made of shadow and leaf and rain, a seat wide enough for gods that do not choose between stone and wood. Morning comes softly, as if the sun itself has learned to step quietly here. Mist curls low over the moats and the half-buried roads, blurring the line between water and sky. The jungle's breath is still cool, heavy with the scent of wet bark and unseen flowers that open only before dawn. In this hush, the city feels whole again, not as it was, but as it has become. He walks along a causeway now stitched with roots, each stone pressed in place by the weight of centuries. Birds move overhead in patient arcs, their wings cutting the pale gold light into long shadows. The faces on the towers gaze down with the same unblinking calm they wore in the empire's glory, though now they seem to look as much at the trees as at the empty courtyards below. The historical truth is simple. Angkor did not vanish, it transformed. Its political heart moved south, its population scattered into new towns, its faith softened into humbler forms. For generations, it remained a sacred site, tended by monks and visited by pilgrims who walked between the same stones their ancestors had laid. Yet the capital as it was, The city of a million heartbeats, the command center of canals and towers, now lives only in the space between memory and ruin. Fringe belief completes the picture differently. In that telling, Angkor was not abandoned at all. It was taken whole into the jungle's care. The gods, seeing the city's walls weaken, invited the forest to wrap it in protection. Each root became a guard, each canopy a roof, each shadow a curtain to hide the treasures of stone from the eyes of greed. When the last citizen left, the jungle closed its hands gently, and the city fell asleep. One day, so the elders say, when the world is ready to honor what it holds, the forest will open its palms and let Angkor wake again. He walks into the heart of the Bayan. The smiles carved into stone seem almost deeper now, as if they have learned new secrets from centuries of listening to rain. Lichen paints the faces in soft green and silver, and in their serenity there is no regret, only the certainty of endurance. These stones have known the weight of crowns and the weightlessness of wind. Both have passed over them, and both will come again. Mystery lingers here, quiet but unshaken. Was it drought, flood, war, neglect, or a weaving of all these that handed the city to the forest? No single answer fits. Perhaps the truth is that the empire, like all living things, carried the seeds of its transformation from the moment it began. Perhaps the jungle was never the enemy, only the heir. He stands before a sanctuary where the central tower is locked in the embrace of a silk cotton tree. The trunk splits into roots as thick as the columns they cover, wrapping the chamber like an open hand. Inside, the sanctum is lit by a single shaft of sunlight through a break in the roof. Dust swirls in the beam like a slow dance, each mote turning in its own orbit. He can imagine the last priest here, bowing to the god one final time, before stepping into the light and closing the door behind him. Now, the light is the only priest, the jungle is the only congregation, and the god, if it still resides here, wears bark for a robe. In the distance, the calls of gibbons ring like temple bells, answered by the deep boom of hornbill's wings. The moat reflects the sky in broken pieces, each ripple a memory fading into the next. Somewhere far beyond the city's edge, a river carries silt from the mountains down to the sea, the same way it always has. The empire's bones rest here, but its breath moves elsewhere. He knows this. The jungle has not erased the city. It has written its own script over the old one, a palimpsest of vine and stone. And in that writing, both have survived, not unchanged, but unforgotten. The wind rises, stirring the leaves until they sound like distant applause. For a moment, it feels as though the forest approves of this arrangement, the city sleeping under its care, the roots holding the towers steady against time, the rain keeping the carvings cool in the long afternoons. There is no bitterness in this keeping, only a patience that measures itself in centuries. He lingers on the causeway before leaving. The light shifts, the mist thins. The towers seem to watch him go, their smiles neither urging him to stay nor bidding him farewell. They simply are, as they have been, as they will be. And in that stillness, he understands that the throne was never truly empty. It was merely claimed by a new ruler, one whose crown is the canopy, whose scepter is the root, whose court is made of wind and rain. When the last step takes him beyond the reach of the tower's gaze, he does not look back. The jungle has its throne now, and the empire, in its own way, still reigns.